The fluorescent lights of Gate 27 cast harsh shadows across Angela's face as the airline supervisor crossed her arms, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Ma'am, I've already explained this 3 times. You cannot board this aircraft with that child." The words hung in the air like poison, each syllable dripping with something Angela had encountered before, but never quite like this. Not while holding her sleeping 6-month-old daughter, not while first-class passengers streamed past her into the cabin she'd paid to access, not while her hands trembled with the kind of rage that comes from being invisible and hypervisible at the same time. The other passengers weren't even pretending not to stare anymore. Some held up phones, others whispered, and somewhere 30,000 feet above them, her husband Marcus was making a phone call that would turn a $15 billion corporation into a cautionary tale about who holds power when you strip away the uniforms and corporate policies. But Angela didn't know that yet. Right now, she only knew the weight of her daughter against her chest, and the supervisor's eyes scanning her like a security threat, and the question burning in her mind: how does a paid ticket and a sleeping baby become grounds for humiliation? If you want to see how one mother's nightmare became an airline's reckoning, subscribe now, because what happens in the next 7 minutes will restore your faith in justice. Angela had arrived at Chicago O'Hare 3 hours early, the way she always did when traveling with Maya. Everything had been perfect until Gate 27. Her boarding pass showed clearly: first class, seat 2A, confirmed and paid. Maya slept peacefully in her carrier, her tiny fist curled against Angela's collarbone, completely unaware that her mother's heart was starting to hammer. Against her ribcage, Patricia Morrison, the name on the supervisor's badge, glinted under the fluorescent. Lights had stopped Angela at the boarding door with a hand raised like a traffic cop. "I need to see your documentation again." Not a request, a command. Angela had already shown her boarding pass twice, her ID 3 times, and Maya's birth certificate once when Patricia first questioned whether the baby was actually hers. "I've shown you everything," Angela said, keeping her voice level despite the heat rising in her chest. Behind her, an elderly white couple boarded without being stopped. Then a young white man in a hoodie and headphones. Then a white woman with 2 screaming toddlers. None of them were asked for additional documentation. None of them were asked anything at all. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am, there are concerns about your ticket validity. I'm going to need you to step aside while I verify some information." She gestured to a corner near the window where the waiting area narrowed into a dead end, away from other passengers, away from witnesses. Angela felt her stomach drop. She'd read enough stories to know what "step aside" meant. She'd heard enough testimonies to recognize the particular tone Patricia was using. Professional on the surface, but underneath, something cold and predetermined. What concerns? Angela adjusted Maya's carrier, her hand instinctively protective over her daughter's back. "I purchased this ticket 6 weeks ago. I received a confirmation email. I checked in online. My boarding pass is valid." "That's what I'm trying to verify." Patricia's eyes did that thing Angela had seen before. That quick scan from head to toe that wasn't about security or policy. It was about assessment, about deciding whether Angela belonged in first class based on criteria that had nothing to do with her ticket. The other passengers weren't even pretending not to watch now. A man in a business suit paused mid-step onto the jetway, his eyes moving between Angela and Patricia. A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair whispered something to her companion. Angela could feel their stares like physical weight, each gaze adding another pound of humiliation to shoulders already burdened with exhaustion and the airline-mandated diaper bag she'd packed with surgical precision. "I'd like to speak to your manager," Angela said, and hated how her voice cracked slightly on the word manager. Maya stirred against her chest, making the small mewling sound that preceded waking. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I am the gate supervisor, ma'am. I am the manager. She pulled out a walkie-talkie, and Angela's blood went cold. I'm calling security to escort you to a private screening area. For everyone's safety. For everyone's safety. The words detonated in Angela's mind. She was a threat now. A woman with a law degree and a sleeping infant was somehow dangerous enough to require armed intervention. The phones came out then, passengers filming openly, some trying to be discreet, others holding devices at chest level like they were documenting a crime scene. Angela wondered which version of this video would go viral. The one that showed a black woman being dramatic, or the one that showed a black woman being dehumanized. She wondered if it mattered. She wondered if Marcus was landing yet, if he'd check his phone, if he'd see the text she'd managed to send 7 minutes ago. A single photo of Patricia's badge and 3 words. They won't let me board. But what Angela didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as Patricia's. Walkie-talkie crackled to life, and security responded that they were 2 minutes away, was that Marcus had seen the text immediately. He'd been in a meeting 38,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, reviewing quarterly reports in the private jet of Meridian Capital Group, the private equity firm where he served as managing partner. The same Meridian Capital Group that held the controlling stake in the consortium that had restructured the airline's $8.2 billion in debt. The same airline that employed Patricia Morrison. The same airline whose CEO was about to receive a phone call that would make him wish he'd personally screened every gate supervisor's training records. Security arrived as Maya started to cry. 2 officers, both with hands resting casually on their belts, in that way that's meant to look relaxed, but mostly looks menacing. Angela felt the tears threatening behind her eyes and swallowed them back, refusing to give Patricia the satisfaction. She bounced Maya gently, whispering soothing sounds, wondering how she was supposed to explain to her daughter someday that the world had decided they were suspicious for trying to go home. 7 minutes earlier, Marcus had been mid-sentence when his phone buzzed. So the third-quarter projections show that if we maintain current debt servicing ratios... He stopped, looked down, saw Angela's text, and everything in his carefully constructed corporate universe tilted sideways. The photo showed a woman's employee badge, Patricia Morrison, gate supervisor. The text below it read, "They won't let me board." Marcus enlarged the photo, saw his wife's reflection in the background, her face tight with controlled anger, Maya's carrier visible at the edge of the frame, and behind them, the distinctive blue and white branding of Skybridge Airlines. His Skybridge Airlines. Well, not his exactly, but close enough. Meridian Capital controlled 42% of the consortium that held Skybridge's restructured debt. Marcus personally managed that portfolio. He knew the airline's financials better than its own CFO. He knew which routes were profitable, which hubs were bleeding money, which executives were competent, and which were simply connected. He knew that Skybridge was 60 days away from a merger approval that would triple its valuation and make Meridian's partners extremely wealthy. He knew all of this because knowing was his job. The thing he did better than almost anyone on Wall Street. What he hadn't known was that somewhere in Skybridge's 40,000-person workforce, there was a gate supervisor who thought it was acceptable to stop his wife from boarding a flight she'd legally purchased because her skin was the wrong shade for first class. Marcus? Gerard, Meridian's senior partner, looked at him with concern. "You okay?" Marcus stood, his chair rolling backward. "I need to make a call." "Excuse me." He walked to the back of the jet, past the conference table and into the small private office that doubled as a sleeping cabin. He shut the door, took 3 steadying breaths. Then he pulled up the Skybridge CEO's personal cell number, the one reserved for emergency investor communications, and called. Robert Chen answered on the second ring. "Marcus, I wasn't expecting..." "Robert, I need you to pull up security footage from Chicago O'Hare, Gate 27, right now. My wife is being denied boarding by one of your supervisors." Marcus kept his voice level, professional. The rage would come later. Right now, he needed information. What? Marcus, I'm sure there's been some. Pull the footage. Now, I'll wait. He heard keyboard clicks, muttered instructions to someone else in Robert's office. 2 minutes passed. 3. Marcus watched the clouds slide past the jet's window and thought about Angela's face in that photo, the particular expression she got when she was trying very hard not to let anyone see that they'd hurt her. He thought about Maya, who probably needed a diaper change and definitely needed to not be in an airport standoff. He thought about the 42% controlling interest and the merger approval and the quarterly board meeting scheduled for next month. Marcus. Robert's voice had changed completely. I'm looking at the footage now. Your wife presented valid documentation multiple times. The supervisor, Patricia Morrison, appears to be… Jesus. She's calling security. Marcus, I'm calling the regional director right now. This is unacceptable. We'll comp the flight, upgrade her to… Robert. Marcus interrupted quietly. Let me be very clear. My wife doesn't need an upgrade. She needs an apology. She needs to board her paid first-class seat with our daughter without being treated like a criminal. And you need to explain to me why this Patricia Morrison still has a job, because from where I'm sitting, you have a systematic problem with how your staff treats paying customers. I understand. I'll handle it personally. She'll board immediately. Morrison will be suspended pending investigation. Marcus, please. Marcus hung up, called his assistant Julie, who picked up instantly. I need the complete file on Skybridge's customer discrimination complaints for the last 5 years. Not the sanitized version they sent for due diligence. The real numbers, HR reports, legal settlements, everything sealed under NDAs. I want it in 2 hours. Marcus, that's going to require some aggressive subpoena equivalence in the partnership agreement. Do it. He hung up again, then opened the text thread with Angela. Typed, help is coming. I'm so sorry. Stared at the message for 10 seconds, then deleted it. Angela didn't need apologies from him. She needed the people humiliating her to face consequences. He opened his email instead, scrolled to the thread about Skybridge's pending merger with Coastal Airways, found the message from the board chair asking for Meridian's final approval vote. Marcus hit reply. Typed 3 words. Approval is postponed. Attached the photo Angela had sent. Added 1 line. We have a culture problem to address first. He sent it, then walked back to the conference table where Gerard was pretending to review spreadsheets while obviously waiting for explanation. Gerard, I need to redirect the Skybridge portfolio strategy. We're not approving the merger until we conduct a full audit of their HR practices, specifically around discrimination complaints. Gerard set down his tablet slowly. Marcus, that merger is worth $400 million to us. The approval deadline is, I know the deadline. I also know my wife just got stopped from boarding a flight by a supervisor who decided a black woman with a baby couldn't possibly belong in first class. So either we use our leverage to fix this systematically, or we explain to our investors why we're partners with institutional racism. Your choice. The jet's cabin went silent except for the steady hum of engines. Gerard looked at Marcus for a long moment, then nodded once. Do the audit. Postpone the merger. And Marcus? For what it's worth, I'd do the same thing. But Marcus barely heard him. His phone was buzzing with a call from Robert Chen. And when he answered, he heard something in the CEO's voice he'd never heard before. Fear. Marcus, we have a problem. Morrison didn't just deny boarding. She filed a report claiming your wife appeared intoxicated and possibly under the influence of narcotics. She's recommending a permanent travel restriction flag and TSA notification. The rage Marcus had been controlling detonated. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold kind. The kind that dismantles billion-dollar companies with the precision of a surgeon. Robert, he said quietly, I want Morrison's personnel file, her training records, and every report she's filed in the last year. I want the names of every supervisor who approved her conduct. And I want to know why your airline thinks falsifying reports about nursing mothers is acceptable corporate policy. You have 1 hour." He hung up, and somewhere below him, Angela was being escorted away from Gate 27 by security while Maya screamed. And Patricia Morrison was about to learn that some passengers have husbands who can end entire careers with a single phone call. Patricia was explaining to the airport police officers why Angela seemed agitated and possibly impaired when her radio erupted with static, and a voice she'd never heard before, sharp, urgent, and several pay grades above her supervisor. "Morrison, stop what you're doing immediately. Do not process that passenger any further. We have regional management en route to your location right now." She fumbled with the volume button, her confident posture faltering. "I'm sorry, who is this? I'm in the middle of a security protocol." "This is Janet Kramer, Regional Director for Skybridge Midwest Operations. You have 30 seconds to step away from that passenger and wait for my arrival. Do you understand?" The two officers exchanged glances. One of them, a younger man with kind eyes that had softened when he saw Maya crying, took a small step back from Angela. The other, older and clearly less interested in whatever corporate drama was unfolding, kept his stance but loosened his grip on his radio. Angela stood frozen in the small interrogation room they'd brought her to, bouncing Maya mechanically, while her mind raced through possibilities. Someone had called. Someone with power. But who? Patricia's face had gone from smugly certain to pale within seconds. "There's been a misunderstanding. I was following standard procedure for suspicious. You filed a report claiming this passenger appeared intoxicated and potentially under the influence of narcotics." The voice on the radio wasn't asking. It was stating, "You recommended a permanent travel flag and TSA notification. Is that correct?" Angela's breath caught. Travel flag, TSA notification. Those weren't just embarrassing inconveniences. Those were permanent marks that would follow her through every airport, every flight, every background check for the rest of her life. She'd lose her security clearance for consulting work. She'd be flagged at borders. Her daughter would watch her mother get pulled aside for additional screening at every family vacation for years. The humiliation Angela had thought was limited to this moment suddenly expanded into a future of systematic suspicion, all documented in official reports by a woman who'd decided her skin color didn't match her ticket price. That's standard protocol when a passenger shows signs of— What signs? The regional director's voice could have cut steel. The security footage shows a woman presenting valid documentation while holding a sleeping infant. Where exactly are the signs of intoxication, Morrison? The door burst open. A woman in a navy suit strode in, followed by a man in a Skybridge uniform with enough badges and pins to suggest senior management, and behind them, two more people Angela didn't recognize, but who radiated the particular energy of corporate lawyers preparing for battle. Janet Kramer, she had to be the woman in the navy suit, took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. Angela backed into a corner with Maya, the two officers looking uncomfortable, and Patricia holding her radio like a shield. "Mrs. Williams," Janet said, and her use of Angela's correct name, not ma'am, not the passenger, but her actual name, felt like the first human moment in an hour of dehumanization. "I am so deeply sorry for what's happened here. You're free to go. Your flight has been held. We have a first-class cabin ready for you, and I'll personally escort you to ensure there are no further issues." It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like justice. Instead, Angela felt her knees go weak with the aftershock of adrenaline. "I want to know what she wrote in that report." "All of it." Janet's face flickered with something between respect and concern. "Mrs. Williams, perhaps we should discuss this in a more private—" "No." Angela's voice came out stronger than she felt. Maya had stopped crying, was looking up at her mother with those wide, innocent eyes that didn't understand why the world had suddenly become hostile. "You pulled that report within minutes of her filing it. which means someone with serious power made a phone call. I want to know what lies are attached to my name before they disappear into your damage control. The man in the uniform, his badge read Thomas Wright, Station Manager, cleared his throat. The report has been flagged as fraudulent and will be expunged from all systems. Morrison claimed you appeared to have slurred speech, unsteady gait, and dilated pupils consistent with substance impairment. She also noted that you became verbally aggressive when questioned, and that she had concerns about the welfare of the minor in your care. Each word landed like a physical blow. Verbally aggressive. Welfare of the minor. Angela had been calm until Patricia called security. She'd been nothing but composed while holding her screaming daughter. But none of that mattered in a system where Patricia's observations carried the weight of official documentation, and Angela's truth was just one woman's word against institutional authority. Who made the call? Angela asked. Who stopped this? Janet and Thomas exchanged a look that Angela couldn't quite read. Your husband Marcus Williams contacted our CEO directly. He's a partner at Meridian Capital Group, which holds a significant investment position in Skybridge. But, Mrs. Williams, I want to be clear. This would have been addressed regardless of your husband's position. What happened here is a violation of our policies and federal anti-discrimination law. Angela almost laughed at that. Almost. Because she'd read enough stories, heard enough testimonies, seen enough viral videos to know that without Marcus's phone call, she'd be in a TSA holding room right now explaining why she wasn't a drug-addicted threat to her own child. The system didn't protect people like her. It protected people who knew people who controlled the system. And that realization hurt worse than Patricia's initial humiliation. What happens to her? Angela nodded toward Patricia, who looked like she wanted to melt into the industrial carpet. She's suspended immediately pending a full investigation, Janet said. If the investigation confirms what the security footage shows, and I have no doubt it will, she'll be terminated, and we'll be referring the case to federal authorities for filing false reports. Mrs. Williams, I know this doesn't fix what happened, but please know we take this seriously. But Angela was thinking about that look Patricia had given her, that assessment scan that decided Angela didn't belong. She was thinking about how many other passengers had been subjected to the same treatment without husbands who could make billion-dollar phone calls. She was thinking about the pattern that must exist for Patricia to be so confident in her discrimination, so assured that her superiors would back her play. How many other people has she done this to? The question came out quietly, but everyone in the room heard it. Because someone that comfortable with filing false reports has done it before. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Janet's professional mask slipped just slightly, and Angela knew with the certainty that comes from living in a body the world treats as suspicious, that this wasn't Patricia's first time. It was just her first time getting caught. The first-class cabin of Flight 2847 to Seattle was eerily empty. Skybridge had quietly moved other passengers to different flights, upgraded them, compensated them for the delay. What they'd really done, Angela understood as she settled into seat 2A with Maya finally asleep against her chest, was clear witnesses. The fewer people who saw the aftermath of their discrimination problem, the fewer people who could testify about their response. But Angela was too exhausted to care about corporate strategy anymore. She just wanted to go home. She wanted to hold Marcus and cry into his shoulder and let herself fall apart in a way she couldn't afford to do in that airport interrogation room. She wanted to take a shower hot enough to burn away the feeling of being examined like a threat. She wanted to wake up tomorrow and not feel like her skin was a liability. The flight attendant, an older woman named Betty who'd introduced herself with genuine warmth and carefully avoided mentioning anything about what had happened, brought her hot tea without being asked and a warmed blanket for Maya. Small kindnesses that felt enormous after hours of cruelty. Angela sipped the tea and watched Chicago disappear below them. The city lights blurring through tears she finally let herself shed. Her phone buzzed as they reached cruising altitude. Marcus, landing in 20 minutes. I'll be at the gate. I love you. I'm so sorry, she typed back. It's not your fault. Then deleted it. Typed, thank you for calling. Deleted that too. Finally settled on, see you soon. We're okay. But they weren't okay. Not really. Maya would be fine. She'd never remember this. But Angela would remember the way Patricia looked at her, the way those officers approached with hands on their belts, the way other passengers filmed her humiliation like entertainment. She'd remember that her paid ticket and legal documentation weren't enough protection. She'd remember that being right didn't matter when the person with the radio decided you were wrong. What Angela didn't know yet, what she wouldn't learn until Marcus picked her up at the gate and explained everything in the car ride home was the full scope of what had happened in the hours since Patricia made her phone call. Marcus's audit request had triggered a cascade of document production that revealed a pattern Skybridge's legal team had been hoping would stay buried. Patricia Morrison wasn't an outlier. She was a symptom. In the last 3 years, there had been 47 formal discrimination complaints filed against Skybridge gate agents and supervisors. 47 passengers, mostly Black and Latino travelers, mostly women, mostly traveling with children, who'd been stopped, questioned, delayed, or denied boarding despite valid tickets. Of those 47 complaints, 42 had been quietly settled with NDAs and financial compensation that averaged $30,000 per incident. 5 were still pending litigation. 0 employees had been terminated. Marcus had sent the complete audit findings to Skybridge's board with a simple message: approve immediate reforms or Meridian pulls its support for the merger. The board meeting that followed lasted 6 hours. The CEO, Robert Chen, emerged with a restructuring plan that included mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, a new passenger rights advocate position reporting directly to the board, an independent review of all sealed discrimination settlements, and a victim compensation fund of $50 million. Patricia Morrison was terminated within 48 hours. Federal charges for filing false reports followed within a week. Her supervisor, the one who'd consistently approved her complaint reports without investigation, was demoted and placed on probation. 3 other gate supervisors with similar patterns were quietly let go. But the real change came from what Angela did next. When Skybridge's lawyers approached her with a settlement offer, $200,000 and an NDA, she refused. Instead, she negotiated something different. A consulting contract to help develop the new passenger rights program, full transparency about the audit findings, and no NDA. She wanted other passengers to know what had happened. She wanted the pattern documented publicly. She wanted the next Black mother with a baby and a first-class ticket to board her flight without wondering if her skin color would become grounds for suspicion. Marcus met her at the gate in Seattle, and the moment Angela saw him, she handed Maya over and let herself collapse into his arms. They stood there in the middle of the terminal while travelers flowed around them, holding each other like survivors of something that shouldn't happen in airports, in America, in 2024, but did anyway. I wanted to destroy them, Marcus said quietly against her hair. I wanted to pull every dollar, tank the merger, make them regret ever hiring Patricia Morrison. Angela pulled back to look at him. What stopped you? You did. Because I know you. And I know you'd rather fix the system than just punish one company. So I used the leverage differently. She saw it then, in his eyes. The restraint it had taken to not weaponize his full power. To channel his rage into structural change instead of personal vengeance. It would have been easier to destroy, harder to rebuild. The passenger rights advocate position, Angela said. I want to help design it, not run it. I don't want to work for them. But I want to consult on building something that actually protects people. Marcus smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since the nightmare began. Already done. They're expecting your contract terms Monday morning. 3 months later, Skybridge implemented the new passenger rights program. Angela consulted remotely, working with civil rights attorneys and other discrimination survivors to create protocols that made it harder for gate agents to weaponize policy against passengers. The training program she helped design required supervisors to examine their own biases, to document specific observable behaviors rather than subjective assessments, to understand that flying while black wasn't grounds for suspicion. It wasn't perfect. One program at one airline couldn't fix systemic racism. But it was something. It was 47 past victims getting acknowledgement and compensation. It was future passengers having an advocate who could override supervisor decisions. It was gate agents learning that their prejudices had consequences. And it was Angela, holding Maya on their first flight after everything happened, boarding through the same Gate 27 at O'Hare where Patricia Morrison had tried to make her invisible. This time, the new gate agent, a young black woman named Stacy, who'd been personally trained in the new protocols, smiled at Maya and said, "Have a wonderful flight, Mrs. Williams. Welcome aboard." Angela walked onto that plane with her head high, her daughter in her arms, and the knowledge that being stopped at a gate wasn't just her trauma anymore. It was documented, compensated, systematically addressed. She'd turned her worst moment into structural change. She'd refused to let Patricia Morrison's prejudice define either her power or her dignity. The master loop that began with humiliation ended with transformation, not just of one airline's policies, but of Angela's understanding of her own voice. She'd learned that her power wasn't Marcus's wealth or his phone calls. It was her refusal to accept a settlement that would have silenced her story. It was her insistence that other passengers deserved protection. It was her willingness to turn personal pain into systemic change. And Patricia Morrison learned what happens when you mistake someone's humanity for a threat. You don't just lose your job. You become the cautionary tale that changes an entire industry's approach to discrimination. You become the reason 47 people get justice. You become the example that proves prejudice has a price that compounds with interest. 7 minutes. That's all it took for a phone call to change everything. But the real change took 3 months of contract negotiations, policy development, and one mother's decision that her daughter would grow up in a world where being denied boarding led to structural reform instead of sealed settlements. Maya would never remember Gate 27. But because of what happened there, countless other children would board planes with their parents without watching them get treated like criminals. And that, Angela decided as Flight 2847 climbed toward 30,000 feet, was the only victory that mattered.